There is a risk that this pattern of disruptive and unconstitutional transition may reverse developmental gains and deepen insecurity. From jihadism to military juntas, the perceived unsettling resurgence of coups in West Africa is settling the region back by decades, particularly after independence. West African countries are returning to the era of rampant coup d'etats that characterized the 1960s and 1970s. This is as many countries in the regions continue to be plagued by legacies of years of war and socio-political unrest. Also, there has been significant erosion in the trust level of citizens as leaders continue to fail in addressing pressing developmental needs, leaving millions of Africans in multi-dimensionally poverty destitution rates. This has led to the toppling of many democratically elected presidents in the region by military juntas, which often promises better governance but at the end of the day fail to deliver. On Viewpoint today, where we discover perspectives and embrace dialogue, we take a look at the recent military juntas and why democracy, as practiced by nations across the globe, is no longer a celebrated system of government, particularly in West Africa, citing Senegal, which prompts today's show. You're welcome to the show. I'm Odiawa AI, and with me on the show I've got...
I'm Favoria.
Join us in the next phase of the show. So, Favor,
yes.
This issue of military juntas recently now is not just, we're not going back alone down memory lane as regards what happened in Ghana, where Achimpong took over from Kwame Nkrumah, and also coming down here to Nigeria, where they had to topple the government, which had lasted just barely 6 years in its infancy stage. Now we have francophone countries which are actually engaging in military coups affected by jihadism, making the military now take over. Now, the question now is, you should have some things for we and viewers out there.
Yes, I do have. So I don't know if I'm not the one who has not been following news, or is this the first time that I'm hearing something disruptive or chaotic about Senegal. I've been seeing Senegal as this peaceful West African country, but all of a sudden we have this issue of chaos because the president shifted the election. So today, Mr. Diawa, my question is, what do you think must have been the cause to the rise of this spate of military coup in countries, especially in West Africa?
Now, we will have those videos from the bloody coup in Ghana and Nigeria also pop up while we elaborate on the issue.
Okay.
We could cite political instability and economic difficulties or challenges, and also social or civil unrest, which will now dictate military takeovers or bring in military rule, the juntas here, which we are talking about. Now, talking politically now, when it comes to instability, it starts from either the executive, the judicial arm, or even the legislative arm. If we go back down memory lane, it was a case of the Wild West, if we were conversant with that, where there were so many disruptive affairs in the National Assembly while in Lagos before it moved to Abuja. It also has to do with looting of public funds, where the president or the executive arm with the ministers or commissioners at the state level are living extravagant life, which is enough for people to begin to protest. Then eventually, even when they've looted these funds, they are summoned to court. Now, the judiciary, which is meant to interpret the law, doesn't actually end up interpreting the law as it ought to have interpreted. Then this case of plea bargain begins to set in, where I've looted billions and I'm told to leave or relinquish a certain amount to the government and still keep some. The money is not private property, it's public property.
Okay.
This will naturally make or dictate the civil or social unrest. And once the civil or social unrest begins to start, the police cannot handle that. That is where the army now comes in, which is saddled with the responsibility of protecting the territorial integrity. Now, when we talk about territorial integrity, we're not talking about the airspace, we're not talking about the land or sea. We're talking about the structures that actually makes a system of government function and exist. So if the army, the navy, the air force, which is protecting democracy, sees that the system has been upturned, it is their right to come in to see how they can salvage the situation.
Okay.
But that is where mischievous military personnel now come in to take over. Why? Because citing examples like the likes of Kaduna and Ziobu, who actually saw that there were some political upheavals and so many other instances were taking place in Ghana, the likes of Achimpong, who was also later on overthrown by Jerry Rawlings. Now, if you look at it closely, these boys came on board and saw that there were gains politically and they could control strategic points all to their own benefit. So oftentimes, it's always political instability, economic difficulty or challenges, which will now dictate civil unrest that will begin to dictate the military juntas or rule.
Okay, that is to say that what you're trying to tell us today is that the chaos, the coup that is going on in places like Mali, Burkina-Faso, Niger Republic is being caused because the government there made a joke of what democracy is. Then the military now had to come in. But as they came in, they too started some, let me say, dictatorship. And that is the problem that we are facing in countries now. And right now we have Senegal as one of them. So we're going next to the next question, and that is, okay, you started something, a protest, because the president postponed an election. And the reason is because there was a dispute between the parliament and the judiciary. For me, I don't know if there's reason enough, but I would like you, Mr. Odiawa, to like help us explain, make us like understand things. Is it enough reason to go on a protest? Because I know that the president must have seen things and know that, oh, we need to shift this. If not, problems will erupt. So is it good that the Senegalese, that they have to go on a protest because of a shifted election?
Well, oftentimes when a disruption begins to come up like that, it has to do with a constitutional crisis.
Okay.
A situation whereby the constitution, which is the established law of the land, is not strictly adhered to. That is when you now begin to see all sorts of upheavals. Now, these upheavals, which you now see in Senegal as a result of the disrupt or fracas between the judiciary and the legislature, is a function of a signpost to coup again. Okay. Because if we go down Niger, Mohamed Bazoum, who was the duly elected president as of 2023 when he was ousted, if you look at it closely, it was said that he was from the minority tribe. That alone is enough to cause political instability. And the military will then come in and say they have no business with ethnicity.
Okay.
Democracy shouldn't be a system of bias whereby this person is from the minority or this person is from the majority. And when he or she is coming in, they look for how to make the system unstable. That is when the military now comes in. Now, a situation whereby you postpone the elections in Senegal. Yeah. Why? Because you have a preferred candidate. Elections were actually meant to take place on the 25th of February, but it has been postponed to December. Now, it's a tactical way of deceiving the masses, of perpetuating self in power. That is another way politically in which politicians or the political elite look for how to disrupt the status quo as regards majority rule of system of government. Now, when you postpone the election, it's now a case of, should the electorate now trust you, who represents the civil and social class? Yeah. There's a laid down rule by the Constitution. That's why I began by stating constitutional crisis. Now, when a Constitution stipulates that you should spend a 4-year tenure, then you now look for how to postpone the elections. Why? Because probably the candidate in question is not favorable to you. Peradventure, you have your own candidate. It's a situation whereby the opposition's candidate has more followers than you have. Yeah. And thereby, once your opposition gets into power, you know that you're not going to be of benefit. Yes. And Africa has a very, very nasty mental mentality, let me put it that way. A situation whereby, okay, yes, we have our differences. We've outgrown the age where or era whereby we have to clash swords or eliminate each other. Yeah. We begin to use political apparatus in place to hit each other, look for how to hack each other down. Now, a case whereby I manufacture, I'm in charge of, let's say, a brand of cement. Yeah. And this other party or fellow individual is in charge of a particular cement product. Once I get into power, I look for how to bring in stringent economic rules to make sure that I sweep you off your feet and you're off balance. Wow. And once I shut you down, it's politics. So it's a case whereby I need to perpetuate myself in power, or if I don't perpetuate myself in power, someone coming through me should also stick to my T's and C's or terms and conditions. Okay. And these things disrupt the political stability of any country, and the masses will begin to protest or even give in to dissent, and then the military comes in. So in the case of Senegal, it's a signpost or threat to a coup. Exactly. And if you look at it, Senegal is overshadowing towards the bank of the sea of West Africa.
Okay.
So it's a question of this this pact which Niger, Burkina-Faso, and Mali have already signed up on, which is a security pact, alliance of the Sahel states.
Okay.
Whereby they have to like make sure that once they converge together, it's clamping down on the set or taking over some territories. So by the time Senegal now sees this, or the military now sees that and begins to key into these three countries' actions, as it was done in the 1960s and 70s, it's going to be a case of West Africa is actually a military zone.
Okay. And that was you being honest, because African leaders have this history of like wanting to stay in power, like beyond their normal tenure or term. They would like to overstay, and if eventually they are going to leave, they would like to put in someone like a puppet which they can control, and that's where godfatherism enters politics, and it goes on and on to deter things. Okay, the next question right now is these countries, they belong to international organizations like United Nations and African Union. What are these unions doing in order to help rescue what is going on in several countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger Republic, and right now Senegal?
Now, when it comes to the regional bodies, we should take a close look at what are actually their responsibilities, what are their roles. Ordinarily, if any nation or countries should belong to a body or a regional bloc or a continental body, it should actually, there should be a policy on ground which is actually serving the interests of that nation, whether it's the United Nations, whether it's the Warsaw Pact, or name it, or the EU, or name anything. Now, a question whereby Africa now is represented or representing with the African Union, the AU, and then you have a regional bloc which is ECOWAS.
Yes.
Now, there tends to be this conflicting issue whereby conflicting policies will influence the decisions of a country. Now, the foreign policy of Nigeria actually states that Nigeria should be first concerning any issue. Yes. But has Nigeria actually been living up first? That's another question.
That's another question.
That's why I began by saying that the foreign policy now from these bodies, whether it's a regional bloc or a continental body now, will influence the decisions of that country. Now, another question now is this neocolonialism. A question whereby Africa now has turned to a neocolonial playing ground for Western powers is another factor which is now influencing the decisions of either AU or ECOWAS. Because, for instance, in Africa, we have Francophone countries. In Africa, we have Anglophone countries. Now, these regions now who are Anglophone, Francophone countries, they were indulging or engaging in this policy of assimilation, whereby they were totally 100% aligned to France. But how well has that assimilation been practiced here amongst Francophone countries? Let's take, for instance, Mbappe, the footballer. Initially, he was to play for his own country, but he was turned down. Best reasons known to the nation. But now, as we speak now, France had to take him up. Why? Because it's a question of we not developing ourselves, but developing other people. I take a cue from Femi Lazarus' statement. He says it's a question whereby the poor people move from where they are to where the rich people are. They are building the rich, but when they come back home, they are not building theirs. They're in a hurry to leave their own zone to help building the others. Now, it's the same thing for Africa now. A situation whereby we have the Western and Eastern Bloc. Of course, the Eastern Bloc is represented by Russia. And then the Western Bloc, we have Europe and US. These people have turned Africa to their playing ground. That's why I call them the neocolonialists. In the sense that they bring in their products and we beat and kill and fight ourselves over their things here. And our leaders cannot say anything. Take, for instance, the local cars in which we produce here. There's a military brand of vehicle produced here in Nigeria, apart from Innocent. And recommendations have been made now to the government to make sure that these are adopted. But if we watch our films here, we see so many Humvees, the Hummers. These are Western vehicles. What if ours can be patronized? That's another thing. So all these policies which influence the decisions of this nation is as a result of Western bodies in which we belong. Now, coming over to conflicts now. The Biafra War of 1967 to 1970, where there was a secessionist movement. How well did AU and ECOWAS perform?
During the period?
I don't think they really performed optimally because if we look at it, the Western Bloc was financing with weapons and the Eastern Bloc was also financing with weapons.
It was like Cold War thing.
Both federal governments and also the secessionist movements. Now, what was the role of AU there? and AU should have member countries.
Yes.
Maybe as at that time, they were not enlightened enough when it came to global or intellectual warfare. Now, all these local factors come into play. It still boils down to the bodies in which people belong globally, how it will now influence the continental bodies' decision as regards political interests, and then a regional bloc like ECOWAS. Now, Tinubu on his own part the other time was the question of we should wage war against each other. Now, it's like listening or sticking to what the good book will say, where do unto others as you want done unto yourself. It's like pointing a gun on someone at gunpoint. You will freeze, you get scared. But it's easy for you to point a gun at someone. Why? Because of the rage in you. Let's go over to citing the slavocratic era. The white man was leashing and unleashing mayhem and flogging on the black man. Why? Because he must have maybe spilled food mistakenly.
Yeah.
That's something you can bypass. But we could watch films where people were practically flogged to death. I also watched a particular film, Kunta Kinte, whereby a black man had to wipe a white man back, and the man had to take to his heels. Now, it's a question of you don't like what you like what you do to other people, you don't like it meted out on you. So the policy is here now is intellectual warfare. That's why I began by mentioning no colonialist playground. Africa has become a no colonialist playground in the sense that these policies now, which we have to stick to globally, are influencing the decisions of the bodies in which we belong to, continentally and regionally.
Taken from what you have said and with my knowledge of history, I believe that the mastermind behind the development of the African Union, AU, was to unite African nations. And AU started as a freedom-fighting organization, like helping countries like South Africa to gain independence. So I don't know if they are slacking, or maybe they don't want to deal with wars again, but this is the mastermind behind the development of African Union. And from what you said also about foreign policy, the thing about foreign policy is that every country has to get for themselves first before they proceed to go and help others. And from what I've heard, what I've known, I heard that the president of Nigeria, Ahmed Tinubu, is the one that is the leader of ECOWAS, the chairman of ECOWAS. So Nigerians are not actually fighting, but that doesn't mean that what is happening to in other countries is compared to what people are suffering in Nigeria. So this is a case of maybe the president has heavier matters that he is addressing, and for that reason he cannot interfere in the affairs of other countries right now. But I believe that he only is not the one acting. He has other people that are around, other countries that are in the union, and this is the time for us to come in, because there's one thing I've known about war. What they need is just a spark, and before you know it, the others start falling like a row of domino.
Now, talking about a spark and everything falling like a domino.
Yeah.
What is going on presently in Nigeria now is enough for a military takeover.
Exactly.
But with recent reports, particularly from the Chief of Defense Staff, Christopher Musa from DHQ, it's not going to likely take over. Why? Because at the end of the day, dialogue still remains the best bet.
Exactly.
If we look at it closely, from Ironsi to Gawan, Gawan to Muritala, Muritala to OBJ, Obasanjo, from Obasanjo back to Shagari. Now, instability now setting again, which made the Buhari Idi Junta coming, taking over from IBB, Baramosi Babangida. Then Shoneko now had to come in. Why? Because there was another instability which people were not comfortable about the results, whether from the existent Supreme Military Council, which actually dictated the election. It was inconclusive between Abiola and Alhaji Tofa. Now, a situation whereby that was now interim, then Abacha, who was brutal, had to come in, and eventually he had to join the greater majority, let me put it that way. Abdul Salami came in now. What point am I trying to analyze with Obasanjo coming back in again? It's a question. Nigeria ought to have reacted when when Obasanjo came in. Nigerians ought to have reacted when there was this perceived empathy that while Obasanjo was a military head of state, his 2IC, second in command, was the elder brother of Umar Musa Yar'Adua. So it was a question of the time you ought to have reacted.
You didn't
react. So it's until you take away the basic necessities of a people,
Exactly.
that is where you begin to see social vices coming in on board. Like
I think that's what's going on right now.
That's what's going on
Yes.
now. So it's our prayer now that it doesn't transcend or transcend into such.
We hope so. We hope so, because we have seen Mali, we have seen Burkina-Faso, we have seen Niger Republic, and right now we have Senegal. All this within the West African axis. And very soon we don't know what to say about Nigeria and the rest. So I think that like if you look at so many revolutions, what they needed was a spark. Just start from somewhere. Even historically, revolutions were influenced by other revolutions. Like the French Revolution had a way it affected the American Revolution. So that's the same thing that goes to war. Some people, what they need to hear is just start something, then we follow suit. So we are not sure, we are just saying, but the situation that the country is in right now, we are not sure of what's going to happen. So that's why the leaders should act, and they should act fast. And back to Senegal's case, I think that what the government should do is to allow democracy be. African leaders, they have a lot with dealing, like maneuvering democracy, finding a way to make a joke of it, make a caricature of what democracy is. Because you cannot just come and own a country as your personal belonging, to the extent that because of your personal reasons you can move. It's not like what we were saying the last time, doing things out of your personal reasons, some things that are concerning the nation. You just move an election because you feel you have been threatened, and maybe your puppet might not be there again after the election. So Mr. Diawa, I think you have to say something about African leaders interfering with the democratic system of their countries.
Well, on a conclusive note, we'll take a look at it like this. There should be synchronized interaction, because oftentimes it's not just a case of political instability, economic difficulty, or civil unrest. Oftentimes the military, because what actually brought in the Ghanaian coup of the 1970s was because the military wasn't properly taken care of. And the Kwame Nkrumah-led regime and the ministers were so dominant that the Conventional People's Party were perpetuating self in power, making the country a one-party state, leaving or relegating other political parties to the background. Now, the likes of Achimpong, who was the first person who initiated the coup, was eventually assassinated during the Jerry revolution. I began by mentioning there should be synchronization amongst the executive, legislature, the judiciary, the army, and also the citizens in which they govern. Because all these entities, you see, all encompassing, are human beings, and they are all having different personalities. So once a particular thing goes wrong, once there are lapses in a particular place, once there's a leakage in a particular place, it affects the other. And a situation whereby there's no dissemination of information as to what is actually wrong, trust begins to die down. And once trust begins to die down, there becomes agitation. And once that agitation sets in, you begin to see the unfathomable. So I would say, on a final note, conclusively speaking, before we draw the curtain on today's show, there should be synchronization, synergy amongst the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, army, and also the people in which they govern. That's all I have to say. Now, the history of military governance in coup-affected states demands a reset in civilian-military relationships, just as I've just said. This would actually require engaging in meaningful civil-military dialogues by prioritizing dialogue. We can also abridge the gap between institutions, promote democratic principles, and reinforce the rule of law, thereby building trust and understanding between civilian leaders and its people, including the military, which is paramount to safeguarding the region's democratic aspirations and steering it towards a path of sustainable progress and genuine democratic renewal. The show has been Viewpoint, where we discover perspectives and embrace dialogue. I've been your host, Odiawa AI. With me on the show
is Favor AI. Do well to subscribe to all our channels on social media.
Thanks for watching.